Happy New Year, everyone. It has been a while since we've been on the mics, but we're excited to be back. Still not in the office together, sadly. Things in New York are, about what you'd probably expect everywhere else in the world. But we took some time off. I did a little bit of traveling. Ryan's preparing for some big life changes, but we have a lot of stuff to talk about and hoping to get back into this pretty regularly. Something nice about podcasts. You can just drop off and you don't get fired from them. Isn't that cool? There's no one can fire from them. I mean, we can just lose half our audience.
Yeah. I didn't realize that was on the table, but sure.
Anyways, man, we've started some new work. We've been doing some back end work. We've been doing some front end stuff and side projects. But yeah, it's really just about getting back in the swing of things here. We have a lot of ideas for what we want to work on this year. So what do you want to talk about?
Have you gotten a chance to play with the server components at all?
No, man. That's at the top of my list, but I'm still going through my bank statements from the last 2 months and getting caught up on my disaster of a personal finance situation due to neglect and New Year's Eve parties.
Just ignore it. Just ignore it and go do server components. Okay, why don't we save that, because it's funny. We are, you mentioned we are doing back-end work, and then there's all this server component stuff, and I think that it's kind of lining up nicely.
Yeah. Why don't we talk about some of our impressions with it, and then we can come back and talk about it once we get a chance to play. But I did watch the video. Have you played with them yet?
I just cloned the repo and ran everything.
Did you have to run Postgres to get the demo to work?
No, she has setup instructions for how to do that, but I did not even use the Postgres route.
Gotcha.
Also, as a Rails developer, I always have Postgres running on my computer.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
not really a problem.
It's a problem for me, and I'm a Rails developer too.
Just set up a Docker container.
Okay, exactly. You lost me halfway through that sentence.
Yeah, myself as well.
Yeah, maybe we should save that one because I could go back and watch it again. But how about just quick impressions? What was your? I remember I just liked your first take on it when you first watched it. You had a few things that I remember you saying, which was, you were really impressed with the tech, and you also didn't know how you felt about it overall.
Yeah,
but it was impressive. You couldn't help but walking away very impressed.
So yeah, I think my my first impression of this was it looked awesome. I think at one point in the demo, Lauren drops SQL statement in a React component.
Yeah,
and I remember when I was doing a lot of the server side rendering, just fighting client side JavaScript on the server. I remember thinking man, I really just want like a route. And this was in Ember, but I really just want a route that runs on the server. So I can use Express stuff and make database calls or make API calls with a server client that's talking to another server. And, you could, whatever. When I watched this video, when I watched the demo, that felt like that, but it felt even better than what I was imagining that I needed, because I was imagining 2 separate contexts when I was doing the server-side rendering stuff. But watching that, it's one app, it's one component. It's a component for your app that runs on the server. So I thought that was really cool. I mean,
yeah,
really impressive. I guess the other impression I had was wow, there's a lot of options for us writing UIs. And I don't want to say JavaScript apps here. I just want to say UIs, everything from server-side rendering to what Next has done, to the server components, and then to things like live
Hotwire
view
stuff.
Yeah, Hotwire, Live View. It just seems like so many good ideas, or so many ideas that are about to be battle tested these next few years. And so I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, totally. Don't mind me. I'm just fidgeting here with my little light. I noticed I didn't get my light set up for this. We're doing this on Zoom. Usually we have our camera set up, but baby steps here because there's just a lot of moving pieces. We've been busy. Yeah, I remember you saying that too, specifically after Hotwire came out. Because it just was yeah, it's all the stuff happening with Next and Gatsby and the React side and Remix. You got Hotwire, you got the Elixir stuff, the PHP stuff, and then now this, and it's pretty interesting. One thing when you were talking about the fact that you can write SQL in your React component and it's all there, it made me kind of think some of this technology that, in the past we've talked a lot about two apps and running two apps and how much of a pain that is. And we've had experience building, Rails backends and JavaScript front ends. And I know for me personally, changing between those environments, both changing your language that you're using and even just changing terminals and running different processes and remembering that stuff like really slows me down. So that's why I feel so productive when I'm in an environment like, a React app with like a Hasura backend, where it's basically like one app, back to one app. I just get to stay in JavaScript. And then why next with like the server side hooks that are right alongside the component feel good. So all this stuff some of this stuff is starting to make me think like maybe it's not a problem with two apps if conceptually like the boundaries there feel small or even non-existent.
Yeah, dude, totally. When you say like, oh, switching terminal is hard, but it's more than that, because now where's your data? Your data's in a database and you want it in a React component for UI. And you have to go through so many steps to get it there. Like you've got to write an API server. You have to come up with an API format. Even if you're using existing like GraphQL or JSON API, you still have to set that stuff up.
Here, do I look better lit right there? How's that?
Yeah,
a little better?
There you go.
Just worrying about the important things here.
You've got to get that data cached, and there's just a million things that go wrong there. What happens when you request 1,000 records? What happens when you need filtering on some relationship? It's just so much goes wrong, and you're like, look, this data's in the database. I just want it from the database.
Mm-hmm.
And so this cuts out all those middlemen.
Right. It's like making the transport part just not your concern anymore. So that's just a pretty interesting thing. I just felt like it was a good thing to like keep an open mind about. Whereas I think before I would have been like, no, I absolutely want something that's like a service that's doing the data layer, because I don't want to be writing controllers in Rails. But maybe what I didn't want to be doing was like switching files and changing environments. But really, if like writing a route handler is the easiest way to get data into effectively a route handler or a function or whatever is the easiest way to get data into my app, then maybe it's fine, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting to see where that will go. But I guess last impression here before I get to go back, and I think it would be good to go back and take another look at it and actually play around with the demo, and then we could talk about it again on another episode. But I definitely feel like it's for the server components in React are for a specific problem. They're solving a specific problem. I think I even saw Sebastian tweeting and saying, if you don't have problems like performance problems effectively, then you can write your whole app on the client still, right?
Yeah, I think the problem is like the client lives far away from the data source. And so when you waterfall data requests, it ends up taking a long time. And I think that's the problem that they're specifically trying to solve.
Designed to solve, yeah.
Right. So since the server components live close to the database, it eliminates that latency.
Right. But what about the fact that they're also, I think there's this other thing which is related to what we were just talking about, which is just that if it simplifies getting data out of SQL into your React component, that's a completely different problem it's solving, right? And would they say that it's a valid, if that's your only concern and you don't have the problem of waterfalls and excessive data and performance issues, you know what I'm saying? That's kind of a question that I have about it. If I was just making my first side project,
that's a great question. I saw something that said, start with client side rendering, and then add in the server components when you need it. So my guess would be that, you don't do that till you have these problems.
Right.
And this right now, this is different than SSR. It doesn't give you back HTML. So this isn't about SSR. It's about generating the I guess you'd call it the first render on the server
Mm-hmm.
for the client. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it definitely seems like it's a consolation of the API. Is that the right word? It's like it's a negative in the sense that you're conceding one way of doing things for two in order to get one of these benefits. So now you have to think, am I writing a client, a server, or a shared component?
right.
And you have to be aware of it in some sense. It's not transparent.
Right. And even more so, you might be writing both, but then you really need to tease it apart to two components,
Right.
so that one can do data and one can do, stateful client-side stuff.
Right. So, pretty interesting stuff. I'll be interested to see how it affects the kind of work I do in my side projects, or we do on our own little projects, as opposed to how it helps a team at Facebook who's dealing with crazy issues of scale. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I guess one of the things like I'm excited about with this is I don't know how much me app developer will be thinking about this, but if it's something that just sort of like magically works with like Vercel or Netlify,
Mm-hmm.
and I can take advantage of it, I think that's where I see me getting the most mileage out of it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Basically, it unlocks new abilities to use server stuff without you having to wire up or set anything up or make things talk to each other and integrate those two pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Let's move on. Let's go back to, when was our last podcast? It was probably
pre-Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Image component, upload component. I think we talked about that. Parser combinators, we talked about that. It's probably around here. Tailwind 2 has come out since we talked last. That's pretty cool. It's really cool.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember exactly what I wanted to mention here because I wrote down the importance of marketing. I think we've talked about this in the show in the past, but I think it's cool to see Adam and the whole team invest in education and things like trying to make people successful with Tailwind. Tailwind 2 didn't change much from Tailwind 1. They added a lot throughout Tailwind 1. They had like all these minor releases which added all these new features, but Tailwind 2 itself didn't change a lot, but just the importance of everything that's not technical. And again, we've talked about this before on the show, but it's just a good lesson to relearn,
Yeah, I think for me the amazing thing about Tailwind 2 was the launch, right? So like it felt like Tailwind relaunched itself, even though Tailwind, like everyone knows what Tailwind is.
Right.
But just like a beautiful website. The animations on that website were amazing.
Yeah.
So if I say everyone knows what Tailwind 2 is, not everyone does. And I think that if I had never used Tailwind and I had heard about it and then I saw that Tailwind 2 launched and I went to that website, I would be super excited.
Yeah.
So you say like, yeah, there's not a lot of new features, right? That were just slowly added and deprecated in the 1X releases. But man, that website's just exciting and beautiful.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's just a good lesson, even for us to hear. But if people are new to web development and they're new to like open source projects and new to and you like thinking about, what makes technology successful and like win mind share and, make people feel like satisfied when they use it and happy to use it and talk about it. It's like these are just the squishy things that are harder for us to pin down than like the API of Tailwind versus Tachyons, right? And in some sense, like it's just a huge you think about why like big national companies spend so much money on advertising and marketing,
Yeah.
And it's easy for us to scoff at that, but it's about it's just all this other stuff. And so it's just worth thinking about, if you're involved in a project or if you're if you're a creator on the internet making content, it's like if a big company has $1 billion ad budget and they're spending 40% of their revenue on advertising and marketing, like, well, how does that translate to you? And maybe it looks something like this, where again, there is a lot of code being worked on, but there's also a huge amount of effort and money and time invested in the website and videos. Now they have a YouTube channel. They're making videos all the time about it. And so, it's just, I just think it's a really interesting thing that is worth chewing on. So yeah, I think they just absolutely nailed it. And it's also just really cool as someone who's done a lot of open source and seen that cycle of people who do it and then get burned out because they don't have any like sustainable way to fund it. This is basically a way they've been able to do that. So it's really cool. And I'd love to see, like, it seems like more and more people are experimenting with different ways of doing this with open source,
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's great. I mean, for us as users, like, I want every piece of tech I use to be a paid SaaS product or a paid open source product.
Yeah, seriously.
I don't just want to rely on someone else's goodwill.
Yeah.
Because first of all, that's super unfair. But yeah.
Yeah. So really cool stuff. You have this note here about composition of gesture and spring. Was that something you were doing?
I think something you were doing and showing me, and I was impressed by it, so I put it in here.
Yeah, that was probably from my image cropper thing. It is pretty neat. This library React Use Gesture, which I'm using on that video course that I'm making on YouTube, is the boundaries are pretty nice. They're basically like, imagine the DOM gave you on drag handler the way it gives you on click handler. And what would that look like? Well, you would just do like image on drag, and then you get a callback that fires and tells you how many pixels you've dragged, how many pixels you've dragged from your original thing, how long this drag was, basically all the metadata about the drag, so that you could do whatever you want to with it. And that's pretty awesome. So that's basically what it does. And It debounces it, so it's not going to be crazy and kill your app, so it's using request animation frame, so it doesn't go more than 60 frames a second in terms of how fast it's firing. But if you want to, for example, move the image, then you can just track the offset. And so that's what this gesture library does. Gives you on drag and then on zoom and a bunch of other stuff. But those are the ones I'm using to build this image cropper. And then, there's some animation in the image cropper because I'm trying to basically mimic what you get on iOS. And so like when you let go, when you drag end, you want to go back. You want to animate back. And the gesture library doesn't help you actually do that. Or even if you want to flick something to the corner, let's say like in FaceTime, where you have the image of the person you're talking to, and you want to flick it to like a corner, and you want to calculate which corner is the best corner to flick it to based on the vector that you flicked. You can do that with this. So React Use Gesture would let you calculate the vector based on, how fast you went and everything. And then you could calculate which corner would be the closest, but then you wouldn't use React Use Gesture to actually move it there, because that's one of the confusing points, because all the demos on React Use Gesture have all these animations, but it's not from React Use Gesture. React Use Gesture is just giving you those data points, which you can then use with React Spring or React Motion or even Framer Motion to actually do the animation. And the reason you want to use those is because they run animations outside of React's normal rendering cycle, so they avoid like re-rendering your app with all of React, and they can be performant, and then they do their own things with using GPU accelerated CSS transforms and using request animation frame. So again, you don't have to think about any of that stuff, which is just awesome. And the fact that I was able to get React Use Gesture working with Framer Motion, when basically that integration, I couldn't find any example or documentation of it ever, because React Use Gesture was built, I think, before Framer Motion was around, and all the examples use React Spring, but I've been wanting to use Framer Motion just because I find it a bit more elegant than React Spring. Was pretty awesome.
Cool. That's going to be exactly what I was going to ask you, is how is the API going between two different animation libraries?
I mean, it's really cool because basically Framer Motion gives you these motion values. So Framer Motion's happy path way to do it is to use like a motion.div and then do animate equals and then do, let's say, x colon some value. So if you have some React state that's like X position and it starts off at 0 and you click a button and set it to 100, that motion.div, if it goes from x0 to 100, when you call set state or whatever, it'll animate it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like the high level API from Framer Motion. But they give you this low level API, which is like you can create a new motion value. And then if you call x.set0, and then you call in some action handler or a render cycle x.set100, Framer Motion is going to animate that value from 0 to 100 smoothly. And so then if you put it on a motion div or something, you can do that. But basically it lets you get at the motion value separate from like where you're rendering a motion component. And that's how you integrate it. So you have this on drag callback, and let's say on drag end happens. Well, you can just call x.set0, and it'll just whoop, wherever it is, it'll animate it right back to 0.
And when you call x.set0, you're going through Framer Motion, so you're not going through like a React render cycle with that.
Yeah, exactly. So you do like in your render function, you say like x equals, it's something like new motion value, is not, but it's something like that, create motion value. And then it's like set state. It's like use state. It's basically like use state. It might even be use motion value, but basically you get x equals use motion value 0. And then so on subsequent renders, it's not going to be recreating it. It basically is just, it's just cached and it's doing its thing. And then it gives you this x motion value, which has like, I think like an x.get and an x.set. But if you ever call either of those things, you're not going to re-render the app. I think. Yeah, you're not going to re-render the app. Yeah. So what you do is you use React state or something else, whatever is going to cause a re-render. But or when you just let go of dragging, you just call x.set0 and then it just animates it back. So you don't even have to worry about it.
Yeah, because so the element is owned by Framer Motion, so it can animate outside of React.
Exactly.
So React just never even knows that a render happened.
Exactly.
Cool. Very cool. Yeah. I think it's really neat. So that it's coming back to me why I wanted to talk about this. I think it's really neat that the composition story between these two things, because I would think like if you asked me to design a drag and drop library, I would have all of that stuff in there.
Right.
And that's just such a high level. And I can tell you from my experience that I would make a huge mess of that library. Yeah. So I think it's cool how
huge testament to the design of it. I mean, they were both, both libraries were written without knowledge of each other, which is crazy. But it's exactly the insertion points you need. I mean, basically Framer Motion, I think if you wanted to reduce Framer Motion down to its essence, it would just be these motion values that can re-render outside of React or whatever. And I guess the motion divs and stuff. But there's a lot of higher level APIs in it to make it nice to use. But I think those are the bare bones. So just like mutable bags of data that you can get and set that happen outside of rendering, and then the actual elements that know how to read from those, and so that's the boundaries with Framer Motion. And then use gesture again is just like, imagine DOM gave us on drag and on zoom, and differentiated a pinch from a swipe or whatever. That's kind of what some of the stuff that it's doing. And so it's pretty awesome. I mean, it's really awesome.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah, I'm going to keep going with that, but I have it all kind of working in a demo of like, so it's the image cropper, and then it's also choosing the image and uploading it with your package, your S3 Next package. And then, but that's basically all the moving parts. So it's pretty awesome. I just need to get back into it. But, I have it working on the final branch, but it's a pretty cool thing. And like, just again, the fact that you can it reminds me of working with D3 when I used to do a lot of D3, where once you learn how to use it, you can make it do whatever, The last time I did drag and drop or gesture stuff, I was using a higher level library. And if it didn't have what I had, I felt like basically powerless. But now I don't feel like that anymore. I feel like if I did need to recreate the flick to a corner with FaceTime, or if I did need to recreate, some motion or gesture that you would see in a native app, like I would know how to go about doing it. It's still hard. You still have to do a lot of math. Another thing I'm going to be doing in the series that I had was the dampening thing. So again, because these boundaries are so nice, a high level drag and drop would say, make something draggable, and then you can drag it right? And
Yeah, and
that's it.
you get an event that's like, oh, you dragged it over this other draggable
Exactly.
item, or this drop. You dragged it to this drop area.
Exactly.
And when you were talking about that, it's like, yeah, that's what I always use, and it's awful. Like,
Right. And
it's
then
not
it's
awful.
like
It's awful because of what I do with it. It's awful.
Yeah.
Like I make like really just half broken, half baked APIs or apps.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. And so, you know, when you're making the image cropper, when you move an image on, like, let's say Instagram, you're cropping something, you move it past the point where it's going to snap back, it starts slowing down. So it's no longer a pixel for pixel tracking with your finger. So, you start by dragging something. It's like rubber band scrolling when you scroll past the bottom of a thing. Like, I can show you right here in our little list. Like it's tracking my finger 1 to 1, but then when I get to the bottom, it has this this dampening where the scrolling doesn't track as much to let you know you've reached the end. And so if you just had these higher level APIs that always made it track your finger, you wouldn't be able to do that. But with this, because you get, on the one hand, the value of how many pixels you've dragged, and on the other, the ability to set whatever you want to the motion value, you can implement dampening. So then I basically was like, I wonder if I can do this. It's like, okay, first, how do you know if you should dampen? Well, if the list gets to the bottom of the list, if the bottom of the scrollable list is at the bottom of the container, you know there's no more content. So basically, if it's above that, keep doing 1 to 1. But if it's below that, let's start dampening it. And then this is where we were looking up those curves. We did like the square root, because the square root of x kind of looks like this. I think I ended up switching it to log, or maybe just square root. I can't remember. I think maybe just log. But basically you say, okay, the new position is no longer just how many pixels I dragged it. It's like the square root of the pixels I dragged it. And you just do that, and all of a sudden it's like it moves slower, and it feels like amazing. It feels like this dampening thing where it's like, wow, I can give my user feedback on this gesture, and it feels like exactly what you would expect in like a native cropper. So pretty cool stuff.
You know what's super interesting about this is that you're not, like, we're talking about dragging an image, but you're not really, like, at a high level you are dragging an image, but when you're writing the code, you're not writing code to drag an image. You're writing code to track the finger movement, and then you're writing other code to set the position based off the movement.
Yeah.
So it's like you're doing you're writing the code that's responsible for like the actual like dragging.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is really cool, which is just not how I think of. It's just not how I think of drag and drop libraries.
It's just lower level than we normally operate with, you know?
Yep.
It would be like, instead of having an on click, you would have like an on press, and then you would say, oh, if I've pressed for like, 350 milliseconds, once I've pressed for 350 milliseconds, execute this function. And that's like, you're translating the lower level user data into like these semantic events and interpreting them as like a meaningful event. But the raw data is like, actually, I'm just pressing it, and then letting go. There really is no such thing as a click, because like all clicks are not the same, right? Like they last different amounts of time. You might move the mouse while your mouse is down, so it's not really a click, it's a drag. So like all that kind of stuff is stuff that we usually don't have to worry about. And it's definitely stuff that native devices have always had better options for. Like native devices have always provided richer gesture APIs, again, so you don't have to do that. But it can be nice when you want to do something custom that you have the ability to do that and the control to do that with this library, because it's just giving you the raw facts of what's happened. You've moved the mouse this many pixels. Your mouse was down this time and then it came up this time. Okay, what do I want that to mean for my app? So I'm happy that I got to learn this library, because I feel like this is a really good thing to know if I ever run into something like this again.
If you were building an app like, I don't know, Trello, where you're just dragging cards between each other, would you reach for this first? Would you be like, I know enough of this?
That's a good question. I know Dan Abramov worked on one of the early drag and drop libraries in React, and I know people liked it a lot. I was doing more Ember at the time, so when I needed that, I wasn't around when that was more popular. So I think I would check that stuff out. But it is true that, again, it kind of goes back to this trade-off, like thinking about D3. Are you going to use like high charts or a charting library, or are you going to use D3? And once I learned D3, I kind of always reach for D3, because I always want to be able to make it exactly what I want. I think it's like the more important it is for your app, the more it makes sense to go and do it yourself. And so something like Trello where dragging is pretty fundamental. I mean, again, think about it. You could make it where like you drag and when you get close, it like snaps to it. And then like as you move it, it like sticks there, instead of just sticking with your mouse. So I think like the iPad OS had that where you're doing it and like the thing almost has like some gravity or magnetism where it kind of sticks. Yeah. So I think it'd be pretty cool to do that, custom with this, just because again, you wouldn't ever get in a spot where but yeah, it just is a trade-off like everything. But if I was really, really wanting to make a polished UX, like I would definitely reach for this. Cool. So yeah, it's really cool. I think there could be some more examples. Like the guides are still a little tough to wrap your head around some things. Like most of these libraries are. It's just there's a lot. It's like very low level, so I can get overwhelmed with that stuff. But like eventually I landed on something that was pretty cool. And there was this one function that was like, I just wanted to call. Yeah, remember we were using some. I showed you the code. This again, it was like 3 weeks ago, so I can't remember it, or maybe even more. But eventually I found something from Framer Motion that was like an animate function that you pass in a motion value. And that worked out better than when I called set and I was changing the duration in the spring in the beginning of the render function based on that. So once I found that, it really clicked and the pieces fit in together really nicely. Because you get an animate function that takes an emotion value and also takes in options for how to animate. So, sometimes you don't want there to be any transition and sometimes you do. So that was like the missing piece. So yeah, I just think it's good to get reps in with it and learn it because it's really powerful, Yeah,
I love it. I love everything about this story. So I'm really excited to see what you make with the video series.
Yeah. I hope the series will be about like 5 videos. You can always go more with this stuff and tweak every little thing. Someone on the first video commented like, when you pinch to zoom, you actually want, like what I do is pinch in and just adjust the scale. But if you think about it, you want it to be the origin of the zoom to be where you're pinching. So there's sometimes if you're pinching in the corner and it's zooming over here, the origin is over here, it feels odd. And so actually the creator of React Use Gesture commented on my video first saying, good job, and like, this is cool. And he was explaining some option that I put in, adding a little bit more color to like why it's there. And then he responded to this person with like a code sandbox and an example of here's how you do it. So I got to look at that and see if that's maybe something I'll add at some point in the series. But you can always refine it even more, right? These things tend to be like that. You can always make them a little bit more polished, but pretty cool.
Yeah, and if you ever want the attention of some library author, you just make a YouTube video.
Yeah, exactly. So that was really fun. Yeah.
Nice.
Excited to get back into that though. We have some consulting we've been doing, so that's been taking up some time, but I definitely am going to be trying to stick with the YouTube channel this year. Absolutely. Like that's basically my number one priority. So, I've been having a lot of fun with it, but COVID times my office is empty here. You're stuck over across the river. So I'm going to try to get this thing set up so I can just pop in and record a video. So I'm excited about getting back into all that stuff.
Cool.
So cool, man. Well, how about we wrap it up there? A little light first episode to get us back in the swing of things. I think if we start doing this every week, it'll feel good. We'll get back into it and be excited to have lots of stuff to talk about. There is a lot of things going on. It'd be fun to talk about the Hotwire Rails stuff. Did you have a chance? Have you listened to DHH on Full Stack Radio yet? He was on there talking about it.
No, I haven't. Definitely want to listen to that and definitely want to play with it.
Yeah.
I can't really see myself using it, but I want to just like soak in all these things. So.
Yeah. I know. I'll always be interested in DHH's thoughts on everything, but it was interesting listening to the podcast because he talked about basically a big part of his motivation is Ruby, like a huge part of like all these tools, is wanting to use Ruby and stay with it. And that's not how I feel like at all, So,
it's interesting though. It kind of is how you feel. It's just you want to use JavaScript and not Switch. He wants to use Ruby and not not switch, but it's like
Right.
probably the same type of friction,
Absolutely.
So
My opinion is like, it's true. I mean, if I had started web development a couple years earlier than I did, I started in like 2012, 2013. If I'd started in like 08, 07, 08, probably would have done a lot more Rails, probably would have written a lot more Ruby. And maybe I would have, once the JavaScript shift started coming, I would have wanted to push back and resist it. But these days, like, I like JavaScript a lot, but it's more that if I'm going to be writing some JavaScript, like the bar for me is so low. Like, okay, maybe if I was writing like 10 lines of JavaScript, I'd be okay with it. But I know in any Rails app, I'd be writing more than that.
yeah. I mean,
Unless it's
that's
an API
that's my
only.
whole argument for client side apps.
Yeah.
What React or Vue or Ember, whatever, is that you're going to have to build that drop down. So you might as well, that auto completing drop down. So you might as well use a tool that helps you.
Yeah. Yep.
Anyway.
So yeah, that'll be fun to poke around with that, and then maybe we can share our thoughts.
Yeah.
But it is good to be back. It's a slow start to the year. I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic for sure, but it still feels slow. And I wish that the city was. I miss the energy of the city, especially around this time of year when it's dark early. I miss walking through the streets and seeing everyone going to their jobs and everything. So definitely does not feel like that in New York yet. But it'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
We got people I have friends who've gotten the vaccine.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they work in hospital. So the two of them actually.
That's awesome.
Yeah, they got the vaccine. One of them, her arm hurt like for a long time, basically like a flu shot. But she said it really hurt.
Huh.
But yeah, they have the vaccine. It's pretty crazy.
Super cool.
Yeah, she might grow a third arm or something out of her hip. So we'll see. Anyways, I guess that'll do it for us this week. Excited to be back. Hopefully everyone had a great Christmas and a new year. And thanks for listening. We will see y'all next week.
Bye.